This is company money because they literally don't have them and expand their GDP. It's like you know, first day 26, and then you got 20 days. Oh. But it's not that long. That's now. Yeah. So I think they get up. I was going to have to write it down.
With that, I think I was going to hear me, but Sandy, I feel like it's so I just want to welcome you all. I can tell there's a couple of people coming that are just came in and so can you hear me, Matt? Cool. Thank you all for coming. This is the second of 2 workshops, and it's been the last week was unforgettable, and hopefully you will never forget and keep carrying these stories forward. This week, Indigenize, the Rising Sun, Indigenous Immigrant Stories, the sun, the moon, and what we carry. Is that right? Mm-hmm. The sun, the moon, what we carry. And I want to tell you that this workshop was inspired by some of the works in the current exhibition here, Rising Sun, Artists in the United States of America. And it's a collaboration with the African American Museum, one exhibition, 20 contemporary artists, 2 museum venues, and they all are responding to the prompts: is the sun rising or setting on the experiment of American democracy? I will be glad to give a tour to people if you want to see the exhibition and the papas installations after the workshop. We can take a little break and then we can walk through the museum, and I can talk a little bit about the artwork in the show. And one of the works by Rosalie Simpson is one of the core pieces that a lot of the workshops were developed from. Okay. There's some space. Anyway, okay. I'm not going to be. I am super proud to introduce the moderator for today's session, Tamara Anderson. Tamara is an advocate for children and teens, an anti-racist trainer, a professional artist, editor, freelance journalist, and blogger with over 24 years of experience as an educator. Tamara is currently an adjunct at Westchester University in the Education Policy Department. She is currently an organizer with the Zen Education Project, one of my favorite things on the planet. She is one of the founding steering committee members of the National Black Lives Matter Week of Action at Schools, a founding member of the Racial Justice Organizing Committee, a founding member of the Melanated Educators Collective, a core organizer of the Philly Black Lives Matter Week at Schools, Opt Out Philly, a previous steering committee member of the We Caucus. I think these are all amazing, so we just need to like honor it. And a diversity consultant for the American Association of Physics Teachers. Tamara currently volunteers in all of her extra time and serves as education consultant for IED Philly. Can I just make one plug for a show at Cherry Street Pier? Because you might know about this show. Right? There's a show right now, an installation of previously incarcerated youth, and they have created this phenomenal installation that gives a sense of their experience as incarcerated youth. So it's on view right now at Cherry Street Pier, open from 12 to 6. And I'll be going tomorrow. I just want to say it just kind of connects to your work, I think.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece, actually.
Welcome tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lori, for the introduction. And welcome everybody to IPD Philly Seminar, A Journey Indigenizing the Rising Sun. So as said before, my name is Tamara and I identify as Black and African American. I serve as an educational consultant for IPT Philly and will be facilitating today's workshop. So this seminar serves as a part of IPD Philly's Program Coalition Building Workshops series that aims to deconstruct stereotypes of the Indian, build narrative in its place that celebrates the wealth of Indigenous cultures, histories, knowledge, and politics, as well as to create an educational environment that is empathetic and caring to Native Americans from North to South America. As you observe and experience the presentations, consider any questions that you may have for the Q&A that comes later. I like to say, questions kind of pop up, so just hold fast to them and we'll get to them, right? Before we get started with the seminar, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Indigenous Peoples Day Philly would like to acknowledge that the land on which we live and labor was stolen from the lineal Lenape peoples or the Delaware Nation and their descendants. Some survived and remained in their homelands of Lenapehoking, while most were forcibly removed, and have lived in diaspora as 5 interrelated tribes, of which 3 are in the US and 2 in Canada. And they are the Delaware Tribe of Indians and the Delaware Nation in Oklahoma, Stockbridge, Muncie Community in Wisconsin, and Muncie Delaware Nation, and the Delaware Nation of Marviontown in Ontario, Canada. We're here today in the city of brotherly love to put in the work towards undoing the effects of colonialism and Indigenous populations, as we are on Indigenous land, which is rightfully Lenape and continually Native American, Indigenous American, Indigenea. This seminar, Stories of Indigenous Immigrants, the Sun and the Moon and What We Carry, and its series, A Journey, Indigenizing the Rising Sun, came about in response to the Rising Sun exhibition and its sculpture, The Delegate by Rose Simpson. The speakers for this seminar were selected to reflect the idea of the delegate within their communities. These speakers would touch on their work and the stories they carry as the children of immigrants or as immigrants themselves within this country. Today, I'd like to introduce Manny Vasquez, Native Americans of Aztec heritage, a first-generation Mexican-American of Indigenous Oaxacan parents who was born and raised in Inglewood, California. Manuel graduated from San Francisco State University with a BA in English education, where he went on to spend several years engaging Latino communities within the city of Oakland's educational landscape as a grassroots community organizer. Since moving to Philadelphia, Manny has worked as a family advocate for housing stabilization initiatives and briefly served as IPD Philly's campaign event volunteer coordinator. Manny currently works as the manager of the community partnership in the arts program at Fleischer Arts Memorial and the documentalist for I Proyecto Grandote for Puentes de Salud. Manuel uses photography, traditional Aztec dance, and writing to connect and reclaim his family's Indigenous ancestry.
Hi, everybody. Need to switch presentation just briefly. It's so good to be here. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Tamara. My name is Manuel Vasquez. You guys can call me Manny. And I'm going to be talking about, my work as a photographer and the opportunity that it provides me to reconnect and reclaim my cultural inheritance as somebody from Indigenous Zapotec heritage and as a first-generation Mexican-American. So this is Míranos, a perseverance of cultural identity. Míranos translates directly in Spanish into look at us. So a couple of questions to think of while I talk over some of this work. How do we retain our cultural identity? What practices tie us to our roots as members of the immigrant community, if you are immigrants? And who are our teachers, our knowledge keepers, and our delegates? So this is a piece that I made earlier this year. I came into photography and my identity as an art maker a little later in life, in my mid-20s. And I did so through a hobbyist lens. Coming from a first-generation Latino household, I was raised with a survivalist mentality in the United States, in which my twin sister and I were brought up to hold and retain very practical beliefs and values of survivance, of assimilation, in which the priority growing up was essentially to learn how to navigate the infrastructures of the United States so that we could prosper and so that we could survive here. In doing so, a lot of what I realized later in life was that my family's efforts to survive in this country also meant steps towards assimilation, in which certain cultural practices that Oaxacan Zapotec communities in Mexico practice had to be let go. The language, Zapotec or Nahua, were forgotten over generations from my family. Certain cultural traditions, like building an altar for Dia de los Muertos, or even the way in which we keep our home, we're also let go. But there were two aspects. There was one aspect in particular which has maintained itself vibrant and has prospered within my family, and which I document quite heavily in my work now, and that's food. So this is my favorite picture ever. This is a combination of photography, Photoshop, and a little bit of other mixed media that I made the very first year I really began to consider myself an art maker. And the people featured in this image are the women of my family. At the center is my mama. To her, your left, her left is my aunt and my godmother, Dolores. On the other side is my other aunt, Achis, and then the young lady here is my twin sister, and that's my younger cousin. And when I designed this photograph, I pitched them an idea that I wanted to take a family portrait, and that I wanted to get an image of them mid-conversation, chismeando or gossiping. And I told them I would love to capture them in a way that represented our cultural roots. So they were ecstatic. They got together. With very little direction, they got the outfits together themselves. They took an entire day to fix their hair, to prepare themselves. The background was photoshopped in because we did this in a very cramped living room in Los Angeles, California. And we set up a tablecloth. I ran all over the city trying to find these very specific pieces of pan dulce or sweetbread, which is a Mexican tradition. And we staged the photo. Took 3 hours because they could not sit still. And I had a very specific idea for what I wanted of this photo. And this was not it, but this ended up becoming the image that you see now because it was honest and it was truthful. And in this image, we see a common practice in Mexican and other Latino households, que es el pan con chocolate, bread with hot chocolate. So there's something really beautiful about Mexican hot chocolate and Latino hot chocolate. I encourage you guys to go find some at your local grocery store, the abuelita. But it's very specific. I don't remember the exact brand, but it's a little richer, it's a little bitter. People will say that you can prepare it with milk, prepare it with water for a more authentic experience. And in documenting my work now and in focusing on the photography and the documentarist work that I do in the city of Philadelphia was nurtured and was brought up from this image. Over the years, what we end up losing can be language, but over generations, the things that do persevere are food practices, the recipes that get passed down. I can guarantee if you guys remember or recall a moment, there was a favorite recipe that your mothers, your fathers, your aunties, your uncles, your siblings love to cook. Chances are that they were probably passed down from somebody else. So like as it was here. When I had the rare opportunity last year to return to my family's ancestral homeland in Oaxaca, Mexico, I spent a great deal of time there documenting and photographing the traditional cooking practices of my family. The person portrayed here is my tia Paula, my aunt Paula. She is the family's cook. Our family is built up out of matriarchs. The fathers of my family would disagree, but you know, if they catch the eye of my tias, they're gonna acknowledge it. But my tia Paula is truly the matriarch of my family. She is the oldest of all of my mother's siblings, and she's the best cook. In the images here, you could see that she's cooking with a traditional oven, with a flat surface and an open fire. And here you can see that she's grinding food and paste and sauces together with a traditional mortar and pestle called a molcajete. I got to document and portray the ways in which she cooked and she prepared food for her family. With this oven, you can see in the image portrayed above, she's making fresh tortillas, and in that beautiful pot is some traditional mole rojo or red mole. This was in Oaxaca, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful opportunity to see where these recipes originate from. And what I found so beautiful was this, even though this was so far from the life that I've known growing up here in the United States, that once I moved out to here in Philadelphia, that I was fortunate enough to tap into members of the community and communities themselves that keep these practices alive. This is in North Philly, with a couple community members from the Iglesias Gardens, a beautiful community garden that's been advocating and fighting to maintain this community garden plot. And we see the importance of these cultural practices and the way that they bring us together. Juana Librado, a good friend, is making fresh tortillas using the same traditional setup, open fires, earth ovens, to cook and to bring people together. And there's nothing quite like sitting over an open fire. Everyone's waiting for their tortilla and their turn. Everyone's polite. Nobody says a word. And you get handed a tortilla even before everything else is ready, sprinkled with a little bit of salt, and it's the best thing you've ever tasted. Using a variety of like grains and meals to make these with blue corn that they've grown there themselves. And of course, the open fire to make frijoles, beans, roasted corn. So, and of course, an earth oven, a really traditional way of cooking and stewing food was something that they took the time. It took weeks to actually dig up the hole, create the brickwork, and temper the space so that it could actually result in like a decent pot of food. And in the images here, you guys can see the members of the community wrapped up, had prepared some marinated pork, had wrapped it in banana leaves and had left it stewing. They set up that earth oven at 6 in the morning, and by the time they uncovered it, it was 7 in the afternoon. It's a long process, it's laborious, and it's a labor of love. And we see two of the cooks here, quite popular members of the community, Kisho Olin and Melo Ortega, unwrapping the fruit of their labor. And you can see everyone's around them excited, right? The meat just falls off the bone. It's beautiful. And as a documentarist and as a photographer, a big focus, like I said, has been documenting the way in which these cultural practices maintain alive. How do we retain our cultural identity? And food is one of the biggest ones. Transmit stories, and this is a great story in a few images. The taco, the first bite, the satisfaction, and the love between one another. Like food, I've also been fortunate enough to document certain practices that we also use as a way to pass down these senses of cultural identity and our connection to the land that we are on, to our neighbors, folks who might not be aware about the land that we're inhibiting, the practices that were carried on. So what we see here is actually the building of an altar, an offering. Before they actually unveiled the food, they would create these, dress them with flowers as an offering for all the work and the land and the benefits and the riches that it gave us. I'm skipping ahead. But another focus of my work in attempting to reconnect and reclaim some of those cultural practices and senses of like cultural identity have been focused on danza, danza azteca, danza mexica. I have a couple members in the audience and my co-presenters who also participate. But what I found fascinating is growing up in California, danza is very accessible. It's easy to see. You can go to any presentation or any major celebration in the Mexican Latino community, and you'll see danzantes. So I was desensitized to it when I was growing up in California, and I didn't take the time to really appreciate the practice. When I moved out here to Philadelphia and I found myself in West Philly, disconnected from my community, a little scared about the decision I made to move so far away from home. And lucky enough to connect with members of the community who had brought me in and introduced me to the world of danza, or better said, reintroduced me to the world of danza. I found it unbelievably fascinating how, despite us being a continent away from our ancestral homeland, that there are still knowledge keepers, teachers, students, delegates that keep these traditions alive so far away from home, and that take the time and the painstaking time to study, to reinterpret, and to relearn these dances, these prayers, as a way to reconnect with practices that are centuries old. And so I've begun building a project now where I'm documenting representatives from the danza community from Philadelphia, from Delaware, from New Jersey, and from New York, to demonstrate how these folks, these cultural warriors, managed to keep these traditions alive. And they operate every day in moderate silence, because we are members of the immigrant community, and survivance often means to pass by unnoticed. But in those few moments where they get to dress in the regalia, and they get to honor their ancestors with prayer, they're alive, they're present, and they're beautiful. So these folks are teachers, they are art makers, they're laborers, they're mothers, fathers, sons, and uncles. And they are the folks that are helping to pass on these traditions even now. And the benefit is that we get to see the fruit of that labor in the next generations. Young people who grow up in this culture, relearning and reclaiming the language, the practices, and helping to carry on these traditions. These were all images that I've been lucky enough to capture in Delaware, in Philadelphia, and in Jersey, as a way to really showcase that, we're still really here. The benefit of my work as a photographer has been the opportunity to tap into these somewhat resilient but quiet communities, and to re-educate myself, and to honor the culture from which I come from, by honoring them, showcasing them, and giving the rest of the world an opportunity to see them in a light that very few get to or know about. So in that process, it's been my opportunity to also relearn these cultural practices, to decolonize my own upbringing, and to begin that work and engaging with my own family and reteaching lessons and languages and dances and prayers that have been lost for generations. My own family, my mother, my father, never had the opportunity to learn the language, to learn danza, or any of these practices. Even before they moved to the United States, to survive meant to deny your indigeneity. And that's still an issue that we see all over Mexico, as as something that I've begun to like learn, and as I've begun my own process of decolonization, and really getting a grasp on like what the political landscape is in our ancestral homeland, is that to my surprise, it came that Mexico ended up becoming one of the, or is still one of the most racist countries in the world against its own indigenous populations. There have been initiatives for erasure, to eliminate and to push out those communities that have kept our traditions alive. And even still, even though it happens in Mexico, and even so, though we're so far away, even here now in the city of brotherly love, they managed to persevere. And in our regalia, through our food, we get to say boldly, "Míranos, look at us, we're still here." So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think I clicked the wrong button. I think it's fine, right? No? There we go. Thank you.
If I get the one after one.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is what happens when you don't scroll. Okay. So next, we will have Miguel Isage, right? Sage? Miguel Sage, an artist, musician, and spiritual guide for the Caney Indigenous Spiritual Circle. He was born in Santiago de Cuba in a region associated with the historic indigenous town of El Caney, one of the most important centers of indigenous tradition in the country. He grew up immersed in the culture, art, and music, for which his native region is famous. When he was 10, Miguel immigrated to the United States with his family, first living in Erie, PA, and later moving to Pittsburgh. There, he built his life as a school teacher, father, and working musician. In 1981, Miguel founded the Caney Indigenous Spiritual Circle, a community to support people indigenous to the Caribbean in reclaiming their indigenous spirituality. In 1988, Miguel founded Sage Presents Entertainment Agency, featuring his flagship ensemble, Gracha Latin Dance Band. Miguel sits on the board of directors of the Council of Three Rivers American Indian Center, and is active in the arts and indigenous culture scene, both in the Pittsburgh region and globally. Since 2021, he has also served as an advisor and consultant for IPDW.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Philly, for welcoming a Pittsburgher. I know there are issues between our two cities, but I think we can look past that. I was born in 1951 in a city called Santiago in the eastern part of the island of Cuba. The original people of my country, the country where I was born, are the Taino people. The word Taino means the honorable ones or the good ones. And it signifies our perception of ourselves as people of honor. My ancestors were the very first people that were impacted by the catastrophe of the arrival of Christopher Columbus in the Americas. So they always talk about Christopher Columbus discovered America. And since in this country, it's a habit to call this country America, which is a misnomer because that's the name of a continent, not a country. The name of this country is the United States. So everybody thinks that Christopher Columbus came to New York City, or maybe Plymouth Rock. He didn't. He was never in North America. Christopher Columbus never came here. Christopher Columbus, unfortunately, came where we are. Can you all hear me? Okay. I have a big mouth, so I should be good. Christopher Columbus came where my people were, the Caribbean islands, and he spent 90% of the time that he was in the Americas there. He did visit South America very briefly and Central America, but he was never in North America. He was never here in the area that we now call the United States. So the only America he ever saw, the America he discovered, was Central America, or what most people now call Latin America. So my ancestors, the Taino people, were very quickly overwhelmed by disease and oppression and violence. So unfortunately, the depopulation of the Caribbean islands, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, the Bahamas, which is the general area where the Tainos lived, and their cousins, the so-called island Caribs, lived in the Lesser Antilles, the smaller islands of the Caribbean. But it's been now accepted that those people are actually very close related to the Tainos, so we consider them cousins, right? So they call themselves Locon, Kalinago. So these were the original people of the Caribbean islands. And they're the people that imbued their descendants, me and the people that came in my generation and generations, with some of the elements of their ancient culture. It's important to understand that we had our own origin stories. They call them myths or legends, but they're really origin stories. And a very important aspect of the origin stories of the Taino people is the fact that the earth, the place that we live on, that we walk on, is a female entity that is called Mother Earth by some. In Mabel's continent, it's called Pachamama. Tonantzin in Manny's. She goes by a lot of names in Mexico. She's got a lot of different names, but that's my favorite name in Mexico, is Tonantzin. This sacred mother is very important in our spiritual tradition. And part of the colonization process, the colonized mind process that Manny mentioned in his talk, is the unfortunate fact that over the 500 years that our people have been dominated by this foreign culture from Europe, we have actually absorbed a great deal of their way of thinking, seeing ourselves as less, and adopting elements of that culture that really go against the grain of what we had before. For instance, the imposition of a patriarchal male god in the Caribbean went against the grain of our tradition. We had a belief, our ancestors had a belief system in a gender deity, great spirit called Yaya. We call it Yaya Wature. And Yaya means the spirit of all spirits. And this Yaya, as it has been now understood by most of the people that study Taino culture, actually represented a balanced combination of the female entity of Mother Earth, who we call Atabe, and a male entity of the sky and the sun called Yokahu, together balanced. Unfortunately, now, after 500 years of domination, our people were able to have a resurgence movement, and we have reawakened, starting roughly 1992, around the time when everybody was celebrating the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Taino said, okay, you guys can celebrate Columbus, we're going to celebrate us. And we began to reawaken all over the Caribbean and here in North America. That's a huge Taino population in North America, living in cities like North Philadelphia, New York City, Chicago, Cleveland, even Erie, where I grew up, has a large population of people from one of the islands of the Caribbean, Boriquen, which is now called Puerto Rico. And these people came into their own, we came into our own about understanding who we were. But unfortunately, that element of the acculturation, the colonized mind remained. And we have, a lot of our people have begun to, and I get a lot of argument from my fellow Tainos about this, of who God is. And yeah, Yokahu is God. Yokahu, the male, remember that balanced entity that I told you about? That Yaya is balanced, male and female. I get a lot of argument about that. They just don't, they can't accept it because it's so ingrained in their minds that God is a male patriarchal spirit. So they accept Yokahu, the Lord of life, but Atabe is kind of like a secondary entity. And so that's part of what we try to confront. And it's an ongoing argument. It's an ongoing debate, especially on the internet. You get a lot of people. There was one point where I was really called out by some internet jockey, behind the keyboard, a Taino, that said, what nonsense is this? Very patriarchally oriented, very macho type. What is this nonsense you're saying that God has two genders? What's wrong with you? What are you woke? That happens in our community, believe it or not. There's a lot of Tainos that will call me woke because I am trying to explain to them that our ancestors legated, their legacy to us is a great spirit that is part male and part female. Okay? So that is what has happened. Now, I have had a long-term relationship with the Taino population here in Philadelphia, all the way from Pittsburgh. We've had, because my career has included the arts, the performing arts. I was a member of a band. I had a salsa band for a long time. My son inherited that band. He's sitting in the back there. He inherited that band when I got ancient and fat. But the band continues, and that established a relationship with the arts here in Pittsburgh and here in Philadelphia, and one of the important entities of the arts in Philadelphia, you may know who they are. It's called Taller Puertorriqueño. And the Taller Puertorriqueño and I have had a long running relationship for a very, very long time. We've had, they had a wonderful event in the early 2000s here where they had pieces, archaeological pieces of Taino right there in their museum space. And we did a presentation. The organization the spiritual organization that I represent, the Canadian Indigenous Spiritual Circle, had a presentation there dealing with our chants, which you will hear later, some of our music. I want to address the whole concept of the sun and the moon now directly, because that plays a very important role in Taino origin story. Part of our creation narrative, which we in the Canadian Circle call the Taino Chronicles, talks about a cave called Iguanabuena. And Iguanabuena is the origin place where the sun and the moon emerged in the dream time, in the ancient time, in the time before time. The sun is called Gwe, and the moon is called Caraya. And the story says that Gwe and Caraya emerged from this cave and went into the sky and became the two lights in the sky. The sun reflects the energy of Yokahu, the Lord of life. Caraya, with her obvious feminine attributes, because she has that monthly cycle, a 28-day cycle, which we celebrate every month in the Canadian Indigenous Spiritual Circle. We have something called the full moon ceremony. We celebrate that every month. She represents Atabe's energy, the energy of our mother. We call her the mother from whose womb we emerge, from whose breast we are never weaned. And by that, obviously, we mean that, babies, when they're born, they have to suckle, but there comes a point where they get weaned, they can eat solid food. But there is a mother from whom you are never weaned, and that's Mother Earth, because she keeps giving food to us from her body, and we keep eating that food. So we have that saying in our prayer, Atabe, the cosmic matriarch, the mother from whose womb we emerge, from whose breast we are never weaned. We say that every month. So this emergence from this cave is actually a birth, because it is a confirmed fact that that word that was given to a Spanish writer, a Spanish monk that was writing down what my ancestors were telling him. This guy was called Ramon Pané, and he wrote down a lot of stuff about what my ancestors believed. And they told him the sun and the moon were born from a cave. And he wrote that down. He didn't understand what it meant. It was difficult for him to understand the things that he was being told, because this guy was from Catalonia, he was from Barcelona. And what did he know? But now we understand that the word cave in the Taino language, which is an Arawakan language, one of the languages of the great Arawakan language family of the South American rainforest, that word cave is actually a symbolic term for womb. It's the womb of the Earth Mother. It's an opening into the Earth Mother's body. So when the sun and the moon were born, emerged from this cave, they were being born just like we are born from a cave. In a later part of the story, they talk about another cave, but it's really the same cave with a different name, Casibahagua. And they say, and the people emerge from the cave of Casibahagua. It's the same concept. We are children of the earth. We are children of the earth. We came out, we emerged from her. And we can leave the world of metaphors and speak in terms of scientific fact and think, well, what are we? What are we human beings? What are we made of? If you analyze all the substances of your body, there is absolutely nothing there that did not come from her, either from the earth itself or from the atmosphere around it. So this great magical sacred power put all this stuff together from the elements of the earth, just like a woman does inside her womb. From the elements of her body, she creates this entity, this thing that eventually becomes a baby. It comes from her body. It's composed in there from the stuff she eats, from the air she breathes. So this really is not a poetic comparison. This is literal. This is the truth. This is scientific fact. We are children of the earth, just like babies are children of their mother, in exactly the same way. So this birth of the sun and the moon from Atabe, the cosmic matriarch, who is not only Mother Earth, but she's also the great mother of the universe. And they talk about the big bang, we talk about the Big Bang, the creation of the universe. That was the moment of birth. And that is Atabe giving birth. So in 1992, when everybody was going nuts about Columbus, and they built those 3 ships, the new Nina, the new Pinta, and the new Santa Maria, and they were going around. They came to New York Harbor, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. whoever knows, whoever can remember that far back, because I'm old. And they went down to Central America, these ships representing Columbus. While all that nonsense was going on, celebrating this crazy guy, indigenous people here in North America and South America made up their minds, well, we're going to do something different. We're going to start a tradition every 4 years. We're going to get a group of people up in North America, in Alaska, and gather them there. And another group of people way down in Mabel's territory, down in Tierra del Fuego, Argentina. And these groups of people are going to start running. It's going to take them a long time because they're going to cross a whole continent, but they're going to start running. The one from South America are going to run north, and the ones from North America are going to run south. And as they move down, they're going to cover all these different indigenous territories. These people are going to go through Mapuche land, through Inca land, through rainforest areas, and visit these and gather that energy from these people. And the ones coming north from Alaska, they were going through the reservations in Canada, Indian reservations in the United States, Lakota, all these people. And they called this thing the Journeys for Peace and Dignity. And they were going to meet in the middle. The goal was to meet in Central America. Of course, it took months. And they was well organized. There were support vehicles that would drive along as people were running. And each runner was holding a staff. There were all these staffs. There were feathered staffs. All the people of the South, they were bringing the staff of the condor, which is the great bird of South America. And the people of the North were bringing the great staff of the eagle, the northern eagle. And there were all these other staff that represented all these other communities. A staff from the Paquiru, the people of the totem pole people, a staff representing the Iroquois, the Onwe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondagas, the Oneida, a staff representing the Lenape, and all these staffs, dozens of staffs, all these feathered staffs were going to meet in the middle. That happened in 1992, and they continue happening every 4 years. Ironically, and it wasn't planned that way, it just turned out that way. They picked the number 4 because the number 4 is a sacred number, but it happened to coincide with United States presidential elections. So every 4 years, when the United States is busy trying to elect a president, these people are out there running, hoofing, So we're gonna have another one coming up next year. And it happens every year, every 4 years, it happens. While everybody else is going, the election, these folks are out there running in the rain, in good weather, whatever. It wasn't till 2008, unfortunately, very late in the process, they have been doing this for many, that finally a few Tainos began to participate in this. And by 4 years later, 2012. By 2012, the first Taino contingent, mostly from Puerto Rico, from Boriquén, ran a couple of staffs. And it was not till 4 years after that, 2016, that I was able to go to Cuba and talk to the daughter of the chief of the surviving Taino community in Eastern Cuba. We organized, I explained to her because they're very disconnected from what's going on here. So I explained to her what this was all, and they became very excited. They wanted to participate. So I bought a block of Cuban mahogany wood, took it to her, she blessed it. And while she was blessing this block of wood, she taught me a very beautiful sacred song, which I'm going to sing to you at the end of my talk. Then I took it to Havana because those people are very rural. You know, they're not in the internet or anything like that, but there is a group in Havana called Grupo Caballero Cuba, who are very much involved in global promoting of Taino tradition in Cuba. And my son and I were there for both of these. And we got a Airbnb, we rented an Airbnb in Havana, and they came and visited us, and we passed this block of mahogany wood around. As I forgot your name again. I'm sorry. Tamara. As Tamara mentioned, I'm an artist. I paint and I carve wood. I brought this thing back. Now it was vibrating in my hands on the airplane. Okay, because I had all that energy. To Pittsburgh, and I carved a new staff to represent the Taino community of Cuba. We ran it in Cuba. We did a run on the beach, and then it ran from New York City all the way to Guatemala. It was run by several of these were young runners. I wasn't running, because I'm not gonna run. Forget it. I ran a little bit on the beach in Cuba. I almost died. There were these young Cuban runners that ran it. We have some great pictures of it. And this is the staff. This is the Cuban staff that made it from New York to Guatemala. I'm going to sing you the sacred song that woman, the daughter of the chief of the Taino community. And that's a picture, that's a painting of her right there with the staff in her hand. That's a painting that I did, an oil painting of Idalis. And in the back, you may notice that I have the sun and the moon, which are the theme of our presentation today. The sun is called Güey and the moon is called Caraga. And I don't know whether you can notice way in the back, these faint images here are actual petroglyphs from a cave in Cuba of the sun spirit and the moon spirit. You can barely make them out in the back there. There's the sun spirit there. We have faces. And this is the song that she taught me. While my son and I stood there, and she's holding this block of wood that became this when I carved it. I'm going to sing it in Spanish first. And then with her permission, because they don't speak Taino anymore. The Taino language is gone. The same thing that happened to Manny's family. Our language was ripped away from us. We're struggling to bring it back now. Okay, so I'm going to sing it in Spanish first, the way they sing it, and then I'm going to sing it the way I'm singing it now in the Taino language, which is being revived. Yo trabajo la luna. Yo trabajo por el sol, sol y luna, préstame tu resplandor. Katia guerrera, guaraya, Katia guerrera, güey, caraya, quiere música tuyo. Arranca tú, Seneco.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. So now you have Mabel Negrete, CNS, native Chilean of Puche Inca heritage, is one of the co-founders of IPD Philly and serves as the executive director and interim chair of the board. Negrete is also an activist, educator, entrepreneur, and artist. As an artist, Negrete is also known as CNS, or the Counter-Narrative Society, which is a transdisciplinary artist activist unit that focuses on decolonization, building community, and the abolition of the invisible punishing machine. CNS has founded Spark Makers, LLC, and co-founded Indigenous Peoples Day Philly, the Mobile Futures Institute, and other social initiatives. CNS holds a Bachelor of Fine Art from the San Francisco Art Institute and a Master of Science in Art, Culture, and Technology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT.
Thank you, Tamara. So thank you, first of all, everybody for being here, for attending this second workshop. And also I have this opportunity to share some of my practice, and in some ways also how everything is coming together in sort of very personal way. And as an activist, I have this urge to always make things happen. It's just part of me. Without it, I don't know what I would do. So I'm going to share a overview of what led me to be here in the first place, and in essence, why I wear this pair of earrings. So part of my practice, it has been also for a long time trying to understand this personal relationship that I have, or we have, with the institutional structure, and then also in a sense with the decolonial. It is not easy, it's difficult, but in this context, it means that Indigenous experience in the Americas due to colonization, dehumanization, assimilation, indoctrination, not only one needs to work within the modern nation states apparatus, but also one that has to find ways to not become extinct. And that idea of extinction kind of, it reverberates in a very personal way. So early in my journey as an artist and conceptual practitioner, I came up with this concept, the invisible polishing machine, in part because I have someone who's incarcerated. The first time I moved to the United States was 1988. I lived primarily in the barrios of the Bay Area. And then I moved also into the Mission District. And my experience comes from a place where our communities were heavily impacted by the persecution of our people, whether they were immigrants, who didn't have a citizen status, or whether by social circumstances of poverty. In a lot of the stories around California also is carried with a lot of pain of people coming to a territory and traveling across continent, central to North America, and youth finding, sometimes no hope and getting wrapped up into gang violence or other kinds of situations. And so in this journey, I have been traveling or travel in different locations to understand how this machine is everywhere and how it's creeping into my body, my life spaces. And it feels really like a colossal architecture nightmare. So one of the aspects of my work was to actually unpack this or figure out what to do. I was fortunate, but also it's really difficult. I went to visit Alcatraz Island. I was part of a residency, and it's today a tourist attraction, which is mind-boggling because there was so much going on there. And it's one of those spaces that that holds so much pain and also sorrow that is unimaginable. And when I came to, I'm going to be jumping very quickly because I have a lot to say, but when I arrived to Philadelphia in 2012, as part of my research and my work and understanding what was going on in this country. I also work with Decarcerate PA and other prison abolitionists. And I visited this place. The first thing that why I came to Philadelphia was because I wanted to understand more about Eastern State Penitentiary, because it is the first place in 1790 that a concept of a single cell was created, and also for holding people in confinement. Part of my work as an activist back then, and still do, is bringing awareness about solitary confinement and what it does to people, what it does to their mind, and also what it does to our communities. Because the people who are inside are also have family outside. And I landed in this territory where I still live and work, which is like now North Philly, it's considered. It was and still is one of the areas where they have the highest numbers of people who have been admitted to imprisonment and or are now returning citizens. So I have lots of friends who are returning citizens. And in that journey, as being here and finding that also I was also overskilled for the area, I started also imagining ways of changing that weight. And before even joining, you know, I started to think about it like how I can do through my own practice, do some changes. But prior to that, one thing that it was my work, but then another line of thought and emotions, and it was this idea of how Indigenous erasure had also, it comes side by side with me. So I'm going to jump into this first, and then I'm going to share a little bit of my practice that it's really bursting into trying to change things. So this idea of Indigenous erasure, you know, and the way I see it is this like enormous nightmare, because this is what it is now, our continent. It has been fractured by borders, you know, and new identities that are being superimposed on Indigenous land, on Indigenous peoples, on Indigenous traditions. And like our, you know, my two colleagues mentioned, you know, that had a huge effect. And something that is hard to talk about it, but it's also something that we need to talk about. And just to give you an idea what the erasure looks like, you know, how monumental it is. When I visited Mexico City, there's this archaeological site where it meets three cultures. It meets the culture of Tenochtitlan, which was the empire, the central region of Mexico. Mexico is like enormous, beautiful, but then you have a church. And then along to that, you have also this big high rise that the new modern society is building right into it. And it's like it's a reflection of what happens, what has been going on, not only in Mexico, here in Lenapehoking, and all over the continent. And so when I talked about like what is Indigenous erasure, it's also genocide. Many of you know Penn Treaty Park. All they mentioned there is like, it's the, you know, it was in relationship with the Indians. There's no understanding of who the Lenape are. Luckily, I've been fortunate to meet Lenape because of our work with IPD Philly and our commitment to actually engage in the, you know, I wouldn't say just decolonizing, but it's actually working with their family, with their stories, with people who wanted to come back home and to be acknowledged that there exists here. Also, Indigenous erasure is ecocide. Ecocide because it transforms the land that for some of our neighbors or some of our cousins in the north, in this case, you know, like the Lakota, while this is like the six grandfathers mountains, for the white men came this place of honoring their own leaders and transform the landscape. And up to this day, they're still fighting over to take back what is the Hetzapa. And those kind of like gestures are important to the people. It's not just here, but also it's in the rainforest, and it's in the territory where we're from, our water, our trees, our everything that we have that actually our brother Miguel mentioned, it's our earth. It is our place, but also it's being transformed. And day by day, we're seeing this. There are a lot of companies now in the Andes because they're finding all these resources to actually power computers. Another is like this idea of history, of how it's being transformed. This architecture nightmare is also like how myth reverberates, how the colonial mindset creates new stories. And as you can see, Miguel mentioned earlier, Columbus never put a foot in North America, but yet we have this enormous amount of monuments all over the country. And that was like really at the turn of the 1800s, when it was at the peak of the manifest destiny, and where white supremacy was really trying to eradicate all indigenous folks in this land. And that connects to also these questions about like what happens. And that's something that our speaker last week spoke about, like how forced assimilation was one of the answers to them to extinct or to bring about extinction. But then the colossal architecture is even in the media. And here's interesting because while I come from the South, I migrated to the North. I never identified as a Latino. It's been sort of like imposed into us. But when it came out like not too long ago, it's like they were referring to our brothers here in North America as something else. And it comes across in so many ways. It's so impactful. I remember in Indian country, people were making fun, and we do make fun too of like tragic moments, but it's something that it's there all the time. In indigenous literature is also this idea of building new nations. When we think about it, how we have contributed also to that narrative, how we contributed to the fracture of our land, our peoples. I come from a territory where this was, and it still is, what is considered to be one mapu. That we have people from the Atlantic and the Pacific arriving into our territory, and then it broke us up. And many of their efforts was to eliminate the communities. And enslavement and incarceration was one of their tactics. In returning to this idea of imprisonment, this is just one another example of how parents from the Hopi tribe were incarcerated because they refused to give their children away to be, to be educated under the boarding school type of system. And when I think about it like this, a nightmare, it also comes across in so many ways. Like I say, through the border, through communities standing up to defend their land in Canada, from people who in Mexico are defending the land, the environment. And even recently, we don't know what happened to all the children who were incarcerated in the process of crossing the border recently, the crisis. So this thing that we have to think about it, and then do and figure out what to do. So going back to what I was saying earlier, I had to do something about it. And maybe small, but it makes sense. So when I moved here in the North Philadelphia, like I mentioned, it was really hard to figure out what to do in terms of for my own existence as a worker. So, And I knew already the skills of STEM education, because prior in San Francisco, in addition to studying art and being an artist, activist, so I also love to teach science and art and making things move. So I created Spark Makers. It's still in existence, with still teaching children. And it was like, this is right at the heart of what I mentioned, that has the highest rate of incarceration and returning citizens. So it was my way of giving back, to figure out, okay, how we can, hopefully the next generation don't have the same path, no? In that process also, I've been dealing with my own personal journey of having somebody incarcerated. And so I carry this weight. This is just samples of exhibitions where I have done all kinds of things, from videos, books, and performances, activities. And I love to engage people in the conversation. This was like an exhibition that I had of Year Winners for the Arts. It was part of a conceiving place. So it was kind of like a marriage between my personal work that I do, and then also with the Spark Makers, because Spark Makers is sort of like it provides that space of exchange, people coming together. In that process also, I work not anymore too much because it really affects me, but having more conversations about families who have loved ones incarcerated, especially in solitary confinement, or who have experienced that. And this is something that we did in collaboration with the Windmill Museum in Chaffee College, California. There's, like I say, one of the first early, besides the Eastern Penitentiary, California was a early sort of like a state that started to create massive prisons for solitary confinement. It's a big business. There's prison towns and so forth. Here are some of my colleagues who we came together as part of the Philadelphia Ensemble Project, where we collaborated in creating the Mobile Institute. Many of us are prison activists, artists, and educators, and we envisioned this mobile institute that traveled across the city, and we did different actions. One of the actions that I felt really happy about it was, like, for May Day, we called Futures on Strike, because we wanted to, imagine what would that look like. Out of this also work, we, by coincidences, both native from North America or United States and from the immigrant community, Indigenous immigrants, and also allies, we came together to stand for Standing Rock. And it was in this moment that, at least in the city, we became aware that it was super important to have a space. There used to be a Native American space not too far from here during the 80s and 90s, but then it no longer exists. And we were trying to figure out what could we do about this. So among those members who wanted to kind of move things forward, we created the Indigenous 215 Collective. And this map is a really cool map. It shows the tribal lands from all over the continent, from all the way to South America to North America. And we came from different places, people from Huartine, Yakama, Cherokee, Lenape, Shota, Taino, Quechua, and myself, and Jacqueline as Mapuche, and also Inca mestizas. And here's, what we came out to is like, we are here, and we need to make some changes. So out of that, out of the several projects, and we were sort of decentralized, so everybody did different projects and in their own. So like Donna is doing the Coalition of Natives and Allies from Bucks County to fight the muskets in the state of Pennsylvania. That's why here in Philadelphia, we start doing the Indigenous Peoples' Day we started in 2017, and next year, this year, we're going to be celebrating the 7th year of that sort of desire to change things and to bring people together. In bringing people together, the Mexica community and the Taino community have been at the forefront of this endeavor, as well as the Lenape and other Lakotas who are here, and other relatives who are ready to make a change. And here's some highlights of last year event where people are sharing their culture, their songs, their stories, and in a way to actually preserve, and maintain connectivity. In that process also, we have people who volunteers and give you so much of their time in order to make this a reality. In 2022 also, this is a highlight, Curtis Zuniga was able to give a very good talk with some members of the Lenape and the diaspora to start imagining like what that homecoming looks like. And also the Taino to start we've been also fortunate to actually have them and share what this histories look like. And that Indigenous futures does not include Columbus. So what do I carry? Very simply is this Cruz Andina, and I'm gonna just briefly talk about it, but it's like, in this whole work of trying to change things, it's also, I had to give myself space too. It's hard in a city like this because it's like, I really don't have, other than my family that is in California and some friends in New York, in Chile. It's hard to maintain my culture. And so with my mom, she taught me how to work with silver, and I decided to create this earrings as a way to just tell the world that, we're here. And one thing that is really beautiful, and that actually connects to also the creation stories of the Taino and the other relatives from, across the Americas, is that at least in the Mapuche tradition, in the weaving, there's many different symbols. And in this particular cross, you see the black and then the white, and then there's like black in the middle. It has certain meanings. So the outer black one is it's a calendar. If the moon is the calendar of the moon, the inside, the white, refers to the sun. And then the cross, it refers to the two spheres of our universe, the ground, the sky, and everything below. And so I just want to point it out that this is really resonates also from my own perspective and my own way of like giving or changing and transforming, that this has like a lot of meaning in terms of like how we carry, how we relate to this world, how we time ourselves. And this is actually each steps inward and outward. It's 7 regions. Each region, it completes a 28-day cycle. And also it represents, it's the outer of this moon. So it's interesting how it relates to this relationship that Hermano Miguel was saying, it's like there's like this duality that we carry in our space, in our time. And in a way we also, we take time, no? Every time we have to go through this cycle, there's different stages. And the same thing is with the sun, and it carries us. And I deeply think that, like he was saying, it's like this is something that is not like the European, like, you know, it was being imposed to us to think of it a different way of like how the world is created. But this is also science. This is also reality. This is what sustains us, you know? And it's that magic space. One thing that I really love in working with our youth is with electricity, because I love atoms and I love like how that does, you know, it transforms, and it's in our body, it's in everything that we carry, you know, is that energy. In Mapusungun is Newan. And is that where it guides us, you know? And that's something actually very important to us in the Andes, from all the cultures that we have, you know, from where I'm from, the Maras, the Quechuas, you have the Guaranis, et cetera, you know? And then, and it's beautiful to understand that, you know, now we're trying to connect those energies and those stories that our brother mentioned about the journey, how from the north and the south, people are trying to create this connection. I was fortunate actually in San Francisco to meet some of the elders from Alaska who came by right on one of the runs. I can't remember, I think it was 97 or one of the, you know, when I was there. And I still have to run because I still would like to be able to join the conversation that is happening, that is outside of mainstream, that is outside of everything that, you know, but it's actually literally is a living experience. People are here, people are trading, we've been trading for thousands of years, you know? And so this is sort of like where all I can say to everybody, it's just, you know, try to be local, you know, in terms of like, here's Lenape Hawking, support the Lenape and their tribal governments. There's many of them, you know, organizations, but also touch with their tribes, because it's important that we join in their effort of coming home. Also, you know, there's this resource of 1992, before and after. And this is very important for what the Taino experienced, and to decolonize the narrative that people keep telling about it, you know, the Mexicas, the Mayans, you know, and all the people from the Gulf of Mexico. There's so much, I revere like the people from the Central America region, because they give so much to the rest of the Americas. We would have not had the corn if it wasn't for their ingenuity, you know, and agricultural practices 10,000 years ago. And similarly, we wouldn't have the papa, you know, in the South. We wouldn't have the strawberry. By the way, another story that I learned that is like from my territory, where you have the strawberry, the Chilean strawberry, and there's like the strawberry from this region. Some white folks mix them up, and then now you have what you all eat, the strawberry. And then we love it. But what I was like, wow, from the two sides of the continent, you know? So anyway, so those are the, what brings me joy to imagine and to keep learning about who we are, what we are. And that, yeah, that is like, we are governed by this energy that is all around us. And it's amazing. Thank you.
So I want to say, let's thank all of our presenters again for a round of applause, please. I'll take a break for a bio break. So for people to stretch their legs, go grab water, and we'll come back and we'll actually have even more that is happening, even more questions. But I like to encourage people. Y'all know sometimes we're in like Zoom phase, we take fake breaks by muting our camera. But we're in person, so I want to make sure that you all have a chance to stretch your legs and talk to each other around. There's I think there's some coffee and donuts and bagels that are there. So yeah.
Thank you.
We're gonna go bathroom. I'm gonna go.
Oh, yeah.